Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and today's video we're covering what's new in Fusion for May of 2026. I'll try to put chapters for everything in the bottom. Like all these videos, we don't cover everything that's changed, so if you want to see that, make sure you go to the What's New notes in the Help menu. That'll walk you through everything that's changed or updated. Release notes also talk about minor things that have changed that really maybe improvements or updates or fixes to minor problems. So there are some things I'm going to leave probably the biggest thing that I'm happy about to the very end because that's the one thing that's been driving me absolutely crazy. So let's get started in the design. And so in design, talking about parts, hybrid design, things like that, we've seen a couple of minor updates that could potentially make a big difference to you. So the first thing is that we can now select a sketch and hit extrude, which means that it's going to grab all the profiles by default. If you're like me and you sketch with reckless abandon and you have lots of sketch lines and you use overlapping profiles, this can save you a lot of time in selecting those areas. The downside to this is a lot of times when we create sketches, there are closed sections that are not really intended to be part of our extrude. So in this case, I've got a bunch of text on the screen, and you can see I have to go back in and deselect some of those profiles. So it's not a perfect solution, but it does save you some time. It's quicker to deselect some of those areas than it is to select all of the other stuff. So that's one area that's been improved. Another area that's been improved is when we're sketching, when we do things like have a rectangle, you can pick between the three different types of rectangles, or circle, you can pick between the different types of circles in the sketch palette. We can now do that with lines. And so if you're somebody that likes the addition of the midpoint line, it was kind of hard to go from here back to a traditional line if you don't like shortcuts. If you do like shortcuts, you can just hit L and then you can start and you can create a new line this way. If you don't like shortcuts, however, then now you can use the sketch palette to toggle back and forth between a midpoint line and a traditional line, which again, you can turn into an arc and kind of work from there. So those are some nice improvements. There are a couple of other things that have changed that I would say probably don't impact a wide variety of people, but if you use the hole tool, for example, there is a new improvement to the hole tool, or rather getting into the hole tool, that I think is important. So if you use holes from a lot of sketch points like this, you can now pre-select those points, whether it's selecting them on the screen or box selecting them. So for example, if I go to the front and I box select all these points, I can use the hole tool and it'll pre-select those as holes based on the from sketch option. And so then you can come in and you can configure things like the size of the holes and all the different features and so on without having to manually select all those points. So that can be pretty helpful. If in that sketch profile I had also made the outside construction so it wasn't usable, that would have simplified the selection a little bit as well. So those are the main things that have changed inside of the sketching environment. One last somewhat minor change that could be big if you use a single design, you've got hundreds of features. Now, if you right click on a sketch, you can select the sketch plane that was used for it. So with the standard planes, it doesn't really matter that much, but once you start to create construction planes and you've got mid planes for various features, it can be nice to go back and just right click on a sketch and select the sketch plane that you can now use for a new feature. So pretty handy addition. Again, it seems kind of minor, but that can make a big difference, especially on big complex designs. There is one more thing that I'm going to mention, and that's a silhouette projection. And so in the past, when we've had complex shapes, especially things that have come from forms or complex surfaces, the silhouette projection to a sketch plane or projecting the outside or the profile of the entire body tended to break. So whenever we had complex shapes, corners like this would tend to be disjointed and not connected. This update has seen an improvement in the reliability of that feature. So if you've got complex shapes that you're doing these silhouette type projections on, that now has gotten a little bit better. This was the mountain bike fender that we did probably back in, I don't know, December timeframe. So that was a freeform body that's thickened into a solid. And so it's got some, some pretty complex edges that are non-traditional. So projecting things like straight lines and arcs is much easier for CAD packages to do. So that's a nice improvement, especially if you use the silhouette projections. So those are the most of the things in the design side. And so I will mention again, there are updates to things like configuration rules, configurations, CE hubs, bill of materials, all of this stuff. If you're on a CE hub, if you're an EDU or commercial user, then there are lots of little updates to those things. And again, leave a comment if you want to see more about that. I'm not going to talk about it here because, again, I think it serves a much smaller audience. Now, let's talk about assemblies. There were a couple of key changes to assemblies. One of them I cannot, unfortunately, I can't show you. And so if you go into your preferences, into the design, assembly, and hybrid design section, in the What's New documentation, there is an additional drop-down box that's here that's not in my install. I did update Fusion this morning and it's not there. So what this drop-down is supposed to do is allow you to pick whether or not you want external assembly references to be timeline-based or not. And so the reason that you might change that, if you do a lot of top-down design, this was the rotary engine from our assembly course on our website. But if you do a lot of external designs that you bring together in an assembly, what can happen is those assembly contexts, so things like if we create a sketch on the face of this, I'm going to say create sketch, and we start to bring in references from other things in the context of those parts, what ends up happening is if designs change and things are timeline based, well, those assembly contexts aren't really timeline based, meaning the design changes at the top level. So if we go to edit in place for this, we are effectively changing this entire design. I'm going to go ahead and put a little fillet on the edge. And so it assumes that that geometry came in like that. Now, the reason that this is important is because timeline-based or not timeline-based has big implications on whether or not features break and the design needs to be fixed. When you have broken assembly context, it is a giant pain to try to fix, and sometimes they aren't fixable. So this update is meant to kind of fix or address that problem, but I can't really show it to you because I don't have the option to toggle back and forth. So check your install or your update of Fusion, see if you have that option. And if you do a lot of top-down assembly design, which again, if you are an EDU user or commercial user, that might be possible. If you're a hobby user and you've got a limited number of active designs, that becomes a bit more tricky for you. But if you do have that option and it does work for you, leave a comment, let other people know. Once it's active, I'll try to go in and play with it and come back to it. The other thing that's changed here is going to be constraints. Now, constraints historically have not had things like limits in them. So if you make a revolute joint or a slider joint, you can control how far it goes, how much it rotates, and offer up a rest position. We now have that option inside of the constraints. So if you are using constraints as a way to put your assemblies together, you can now put those limits in there. A quick note for you, motion links still do not support constraint sets. They only support joints. So if you are using constraints for mechanical motion, keep in mind that is a limitation. So you can't put a revolute joint and a slider joint together like a rack and pinion if you're doing it with constraint sets. It still does need to be joints to make that happen. For myself, I typically use constraint sets for non-motion type assembly. So putting a cylinder head on a cylinder or putting the cylinder to the engine case or putting the cases together. Those are the types of things that I typically use the constraint sets for rather than say a rigid joint. And then I'll use joints for the mechanical motion inside here. So for example, getting the pistons to move up and down, those are all done with joints, because for me, that just makes a little bit more sense controlling the degrees of freedom. But again, you can use it however you feel fit. Once more, just a quick note, there are changes to configurations. If you are a big configuration user and you do have the design extension, make sure that you do check out those changes. Again, it doesn't really impact hobby users because you don't have access to those extensions. All right, let's move on to the Autodesk Assistant. Now, I've done a couple videos on the Autodesk Assistant. You need to turn on tech preview if you want it to really interact with your model. We've talked about this before. I've given my opinion on how it works and how it doesn't work and what I think you should use it for. In this release, they opened up the ability for it to create a detailed drawing. The problem that I have with this is that this is essentially running through an automated drawing. And you still have to go in and select the dimension scheme and how dense the dimensions are. You still have to interact with it. So if you ask it to generate a drawing, and I'll do a little example here. Can you make a drawing of this assembly with A3 sheet, size, ISO standard? And so what it does is it will create a script, like a one-time run script, that will call in the automated drawing. This is the way that this tool works. Now, if you have the tech preview turned on, it can run that for you. If you don't have the tech preview turned on, it's a little bit more limited in what it can do. And so you can see here, it doesn't expose a way to create a new drawing with specific settings through the API, and so it kind of walks you through all of this stuff. Now, in the time it takes to do this, I can just go to Drawing from Design and click Automatic and have it create based on those standard settings. So A3 standard, ISO standard, first level, all levels, I can decide what I want, and I can just have it go off and create that drawing. Once the drawing is created through the Autodesk Assistant, you still have to go in and select which dimension scheme you want or use dimension cleanup. And so I don't feel like that's a very big update. I know that they're pushing really hard to get this Autodesk Assistant to work well for people. I've tried to use it for doing things like create tool paths in the manufacturer workspace, and I still stick by my original standpoint of it's really great as a help file, and it's also really great to do things like help you with API coding. Past that, I haven't found a whole lot of use cases where I am really going to it to do anything. And that's just my own personal opinion. If you use it and you like it, leave a comment, let people know. I'm going to continue to play with it and find out where it works and where it doesn't, with limited impact on my traditional work schedule, but I will, of course, give you updates on that. But for the most part, I kind of leave it dormant, and I don't use it for much other than helping with API programming. I found it to be incredibly helpful in those senses. All right, so let's move on. We don't typically cover manufacturing on this channel. We have done some CAM videos. We do have a CAM course on our website going from two-axis programming like laser jet, water jet stuff, all the way up to multi-axis. And so we do cover that, and I do cover that quite a bit for Autodesk as well. But there are just a few small changes that I do want to mention. The first change that I want to mention is in the toolpath dialog when you're selecting tools, they have fixed the issue with the tool display from this dropdown. So if you have a bunch of tools that are used in your current setup, your current design, they historically would have been all kinds of out of order in this list. With this update, they're now in numerical order. So that's nice. That's how we expect to see them inside of the tool library. They don't need to be out of order in the setup. They should be in numerical order. You can, of course, filter and change the number orders and things like that in here, but that has been fixed. The other thing that has been updated that I think is helpful, if you use the 3D pocket clearing tool, I traditionally don't. I go to 3D adaptive clearing. I feel like it's more efficient with the tool. It's more consistent load. But if you happen to use 3D pocket clearing, they have updated the flat area detection to now where it focuses on the area rather than the Z height. And so what happened historically in the past is that it would jump around quite a bit. The yellow lines are rapid movements. And so it would move from doing a Z height inside of this bore over to this one and so on. And it just was not very efficient. The flat area detection has been updated. So now it focuses more at the basically the pocket location, which some other toolpaths allow you to do that. but this has been improved. So it's much more efficient now. So if you do happen to use 3D pocket clearing, then that has gotten a bump in efficiency, at least from some initial testing that I've done. Okay, so the last thing, and probably the biggest thing, the biggest improvement in my mind, and I'm going to go ahead and close all these files out. In the last update that happened in April, we saw the addition, or basically the move of this home button, and it moved to the position where the data panel button used to be. That was real annoying for me because I've been using Fusion since it was a thing in 2015. And so that data panel button there means I accidentally click the home button all the time. And what happens with that is in the home button, if you click on a file, it opens it. There's no like thumbnail preview that you get. You don't click on it and get information about the file. And with that change, what ended up happening is if you close the last document you had open, it would automatically go to the home instead of going to a new untitled document, which is what it's done forever. And so what would happen is you'd have to start a new untitled document in order to get into the data panel because the data panel isn't accessible from home. They fixed that, and it is optional now. And so in your preferences, there is a startup experience, and now it treats this default design type as what happens when you close out your design. So enough people complained about it and provided feedback that they fixed it, and now it goes back to an untitled design, which means you can get into your data panel. That, I think, is the biggest change that was driving me nuts from the last update. So I'm really happy to see that that has been improved. There are, of course, with every update, there are always claims about efficiency, files opening faster, designs, complex design references opening faster, appearances being applied faster. I historically have not seen performance improvements when they've been claimed. I know some people have, some people haven't. The computer that I use on a day-to-day basis is a little bit older. I mean, it's a 10th gen i7. It's got 64 gigs of RAM in it. It's got a good RTX graphics card in it. So it's not like a slouch by any means. But even opening this complex design, it's claimed that it's 66% faster. This has some internal hardware. This has some external references, and each of these references have additional references. So this is, probably a good example of a complex design. This is one I modeled a few years back for Autodesk. And I have not seen an improvement there. I wish that I did. Saving seems to be okay, but I don't know if it's because we don't notice the save dialog anymore if you're on a CE style hub. But I have not noticed a get latest or opening complex assemblies or closing. The data panel seems to be kind of sluggish. The home tab seems to be kind of sluggish for me. And that's just the general, the general sort of thing that I've noticed with these claimed performance improvements. So if you are seeing performance improvements, please leave me a comment. Let me know. I'd love to know what your system is, if that's having an impact on it, if it's Mac or if it's a Windows system, or if you're seeing kind of slowdown like me as well. I've looked at lots of comments on places like Reddit, and most of the comments seem to indicate slow performance, especially with the Home tab. And so I would love to know if anybody's actually seeing these performance improvements, and that way we can kind of document what the use case is, if it's a specific design or something like that. So again, those are going to be the big changes for the update of May of 2026. Once again, to see all of them, make sure you go into the help menu, go to what's new. If you do have the option for the assembly external context top-down references, let me know. I haven't seen it. The people that I've asked have not seen it either, so I don't know if they delayed that in the update. It's in the blog post. It talks about it there. But if you have it, then I'd love to know if you're on a EDU license, commercial license, if you're on a hobby license and it showed up, let me know. And again, if you want to see anything else or have any questions, leave a comment. As always, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.